They said it right there in my own living room, in front of the lawyer and my daughter-in-law, Diana, and the late afternoon light coming through the curtains I had sewn myself 30 years ago. Vincent stood near the altar where your father's photograph still watched over the room, and he said it the way a man says something he has practiced many times in private, calm and certain, and just loud enough for everyone to hear. Mother hasn't been herself since father died. She doesn't even remember signing that will. The doctor confirmed it. She's not competent to make these decisions anymore. I was sitting in the wooden chair your father used to call mine. The one with the armrests worn smooth from decades of my hands resting there while I read. I was wearing my gray Audai, the simple one, the one I wear when I want to feel composed. My reading glasses, the tortoiseshell frames I have had since the year I was promoted to head librarian, were folded in my lap. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand. I looked at my son, at the lawyer who would not meet my eyes, at Diana who was examining her own fingernails with great concentration, and I allowed myself one small smile, just one side of my mouth, just enough. Nobody in that room understood why I was smiling. That was exactly as I intended. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what happened. Not because you need to understand me, but because the story does not make sense without it. My name is Hanh Nguyen. I am 69 years old. For 35 years, I was the head librarian at the university in the city where I was born, where I raised my children, where I buried my husband 3 years ago on a Thursday morning when the rain came sideways and the incense smoke could not decide which direction to travel. I cataloged over 400,000 volumes in my career. I built a system for tracking rare manuscripts that 3 other universities later adopted. I taught 2 generations of graduate students how to find what they were looking for, and more importantly, how to recognize it when they found it. I know how documents work. I know what a signature means. I know how to read the date on a page and understand everything that date implies. I retired 7 years ago. I live now in the house your father and I bought when Vincent was still in school and Lily was learning to ride a bicycle in the alley behind the neighbor's kitchen garden. It is not a large house. The walls hold 40 years of living, the scuff marks on the doorframe where we measured the children's heights, the water stain above the kitchen window from the storm of 2009, the smell of incense that has soaked so deep into the wood that even when I do not light any, the room still carries it. Your father's altar stands against the north wall. His photograph shows him at 52, the year we went to Ha Long Bay for our anniversary, and he refused to wear the life jacket on the boat because he said it made him look like an orange. He is smiling in that photograph. He always knew when something was worth smiling about. I think about him every morning when I light the incense. 3 sticks. Always 3. When he died, I grieved quietly, the way I do everything. I did not perform my sorrow for anyone. I sat with it, lived inside it. Let it work through me the way weather works through a season. Vincent visited twice in the first month, then less, then only on the holidays. He brought Diana, who would look at the house the way she looked at properties listed in the newspaper, measuring, calculating, wondering what it might be worth if the right people knew about it. I noticed. I always notice. I simply do not always react. Lily called every week. Lily brought soup. Lily sat with me on the porch and did not try to fix anything. She is a literature teacher. She understands that some things need time, not solutions. It was Lily who first told me, quietly, 6 months after your father's funeral, that Vincent had spoken to a developer about the land. Not the house itself. The land. The parcel on the eastern edge of the property that your father's grandfather had held for 3 generations, that had passed to your father and then to me, that I had always intended to keep inside the family. I thanked Lily for telling me. I made tea. I sat with that information for 3 days. Then I called Arthur Bloom. Arthur had been the family's estate lawyer since before Vincent was born. A careful man, thin and quiet, with a way of listening that reminded me of the best research librarians, the ones who wait until you finish your whole question before they begin to answer. He came to the house on a Tuesday afternoon, and we sat at the kitchen table while the smell of jasmine came through the window. And I told him exactly what I wanted. I did not want complications. I did not want confusion. I did not want, in the years after I was gone, for anyone to be able to claim they did not understand my intentions. I signed the will 14 months before Vincent walked into my living room with his lawyer and his careful practice sentence. I signed it at that kitchen table, with Arthur as witness, and with my reading glasses on, because I wanted to see every word clearly before I put my name to it. The original is not in this house. That is all I will say for now. When Vincent finished speaking that afternoon, the lawyer, a young man I had never met, someone Vincent had hired, set a folder on the coffee table and looked at me with the particular expression of a person who expects no resistance. The incense had burned down to half its length. The smoke moved in a slow curl toward the window. Outside, somewhere on the street, a motorbike passed and faded. I looked at my son's face. I looked at the confidence there, the certainty, the assumption. He had the doctor's report. He had his argument prepared. He had decided, without asking me, without looking carefully, that I was something that could be managed, redirected, set aside. He did not know about the box. He had never thought to look in the place where I had spent 35 years keeping the things that mattered most. Still water runs deepest, and the river that moves without noise carries the heaviest stone. I unfolded my glasses and put them on. I looked at the young lawyer. I looked at my son. "Please," I said, "go ahead." Your father's name was Min, and he had a way of folding a newspaper that I have never seen anyone else replicate. He would crease it exactly once down the center, then fold it again at a precise angle, so that the section he wanted to read sat flat in his hand without requiring any further adjustment. He had done it the same way every morning for 40 years. I used to watch him from the kitchen doorway while the water boiled, and I never once told him I was watching. Some things are too ordinary to mention, and too precious to risk by naming them. We met when I was 26 and newly assigned to the university library's cataloging department. He was a lecturer in civil engineering who came in every Thursday to request the same journals and always returned them one day early. I noticed the early returns before I noticed anything else about him. In a library, the way a person treats borrowed things tells you most of what you need to know. He asked me to dinner after 4 months of Thursdays. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 1 week and then I said yes, because I had already decided within the first few seconds, and I saw no reason to be dishonest about that, only to myself. We were married in the spring. Small ceremony. My mother made the food, which was the most important thing. His mother cried throughout, which was also the most important thing. The house came 7 years later, when Vincent was 4, and already showing his father's habit of examining objects from multiple angles before committing to an opinion. We walked through it on a Sunday afternoon, Min with his hands clasped behind his back the way he always stood when he was thinking, me with a notebook I used to write down the things worth remembering, water pressure in the kitchen, width of the eastern windows, the quality of light in the room that would become the study. The land to the east of the house is what made Min decide. It had been part of the original parcel, overgrown and uneven, not immediately useful. But Min had looked at it the way he looked at engineering problems, not for what it was, but for what it could become over time with patience and care. He said nothing to me about it until after we had signed the papers. Then he walked me out to that eastern edge in the late afternoon and showed me how the soil was deep and dark and good, how the slope would protect it from flooding, how in 20 years it would be worth more than the house itself. Or we give it to the children, he said, whichever they need more. I wrote that in the notebook. Lily came 3 years after we moved in. She was born during a thunderstorm, which her father said explained everything about her personality. She arrived in the world already in a hurry to get somewhere, and she has never entirely stopped. As a child, she read with a flashlight under the covers long after I had turned out the bedroom light. I always knew. I never said anything. I recognized the impulse. Vincent was a quieter boy than Lily, though quiet in a different way than I am quiet. My silence comes from observation, from the habit of watching before speaking, from 35 years of understanding that a library is not a silent place but a listening one. Vincent's quiet came from somewhere else. Even as a child, there was a quality of calculation in him, a measuring of distances between himself and whatever he wanted. I saw it and I told myself it was ambition. That ambition in a child was a gift. I was not entirely wrong about that. I was not entirely right either. Min knew. He never said so directly, but he knew. There were conversations we had late at night after the children were asleep, voices low, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, where he would say things like, "Vincent will need to find his own way," or "I worry that we have made things too easy." I would listen and think and sometimes agree and sometimes not. We disagreed well. That was one of the things we were good at. He died of a stroke. Fast, the doctors said, as if speed was a mercy and not simply speed. He was in the garden when it happened, near the eastern edge of the land, which I have thought about many times since. The neighbor found him, called me. I drove to the hospital the way I drive when I am very frightened, carefully, both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. He was already gone when I arrived. I stood in the corridor for a long time before I went in to see him. I needed those minutes. I will not explain what I did with them. At home that evening, after everything, I lit 3 sticks of incense and stood at the altar where his photograph now watched the room. The smoke moved in small currents I could not account for, shifting directions without wind, finding its way through the house, as if looking for something it had left behind. I talked to him. I do not think this requires justification. In the weeks that followed, I did what I have always done with difficult things. I observed. I catalogued. I noted what was present and what was absent, who came and how often and with what in their eyes when they arrived. Lily came with soup and silence, and her father's gift for being useful without intruding. Vincent came with his wife and a briefcase, and a manner that reminded me, though I could not have said exactly why, of someone arriving to assess the value of furniture before an estate sale. I wrote nothing in the notebook about that. Some observations are better kept only in the mind, where they cannot be found by someone who does not know where to look. The house settled into its new configuration around his absence. I learned to fold the newspaper myself, though never the way he did. The study became the room where I read in the evenings. The garden continued, season by season, in the particular indifferent way that growing things continue whether or not the person who planted them is still there to see it. I was not lonely. I want to be clear about that. I was altered, which is different. A book with a chapter missing is not incomplete if the remaining chapters still hold their meaning. It is simply a different book than the one you thought you were reading. It was in this altered life, in the 3rd winter after Minja's death, that I first noticed the way Vincent looked at the eastern land, not with his father's patience, not with any thought of what it might become over time, or what it might one day mean to a daughter or a grandchild. Just the measuring, just the calculating of distances, and something in me went very still in a way that had nothing to do with calm. The first sign was a question, not a confrontation, not a declaration. Just a question, asked in the particular tone Vincent uses when he already knows the answer he wants and is simply waiting to see whether you will give it to him. He came on a Saturday morning in early spring, 3 months after your father's first anniversary. I had been in the garden, checking on the lemongrass that grows along the south wall, when I heard his car in the lane. I recognized the sound of the engine before I saw the vehicle. He had bought a new car the previous year, larger than necessary, the kind of car that announces something about its owner before the owner steps out. I came inside and washed my hands at the kitchen sink. He let himself in through the front door without knocking, which he has done since he was a teenager, and which I have never corrected, because I had always believed it meant he felt at home. I am less certain of that interpretation now. Diana was not with him. That was the first thing I noticed. Vincent always brings Diana to family visits. She sits with her back very straight and speaks in careful sentences, and watches the house the way I imagine a surveyor. Watches land not with hostility, but with professional detachment, taking measurements that will be useful later. Her absence that morning felt deliberate, in a way I could not immediately name. I was in the neighborhood, he said, which was not true. Nobody passes through this part of the city on the way to anywhere Vincent goes. I made tea. He sat at the kitchen table and watched me move around the room with an expression I recognized from his childhood, the one he wore when he was deciding how to ask for something he suspected I would refuse. "There's a developer," he said, after the tea was poured, and I had sat down across from him, a serious one. "Someone I've been talking to about a project near here." I waited. "He's interested in the eastern land." I picked up my cup. The tea was still too hot to drink, but I held it anyway, both hands around the ceramic, feeling the warmth work into my fingers. "That land belongs to the house," I said. "It's listed separately in the title records. Papa had it registered as a distinct parcel." He knew this because he had looked. He had gone through the title records, the property documents, the registration filings, And he had done it without asking me, and without telling me until now. Sitting at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with no Diana, and no warning, and a question that was not really a question at all. "I know how it is registered," I said. "I was present when your father registered it. Then you know it could be sold separately. Many things can be done. That is different from whether they will be done." He looked at me then with something that shifted briefly behind his eyes, not anger, not quite, but the precursor to it, the moment before a man decides whether patience is still worth the effort. I have seen that expression on the faces of people who believe they are being reasonable and cannot understand why the other person will not simply agree. "Mother," he said, and his voice dropped into the register he uses when he wants to sound concerned. "I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to help you think practically. You're living alone in a house that's becoming expensive to maintain. The garden alone. I tend the garden myself. For now, but you're 69, he paused. Things change." I set down my cup. I looked at my son's face, at the careful arrangement of concern he had prepared for this conversation, and I thought about what Min had said in the garden on the afternoon we first walked this property. Whichever they need more. He had meant it as a gift, held loosely, given freely according to need. He had not meant it as an inventory to be managed by someone else's calculation. "I'll think about it," I said. It was not a yes. Vincent heard it as something closer to a yes than it was. I watched him decide this, watched the small relaxation in his shoulders, the way he reached for his tea with a different quality of ease than he had carried into the room. We talked about other things for 30 minutes, his work, a project in the Northern District, a client he was pleased with. I listened and asked questions and refilled his cup once. When he left, he touched my shoulder briefly at the door, the way he does when he believes things have gone in his direction. After his car had gone, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then I went to the desk in the study and found the notebook, the one from the year we bought the house, the one with the water pressure and the window measurements, and Min's words about the eastern land written in my own careful handwriting. I read those pages, all of them, not because I had forgotten what was in them, because I wanted to hold the original against what was being offered now, and feel the distance between the two. The distance was considerable. I put the notebook back in its place and went to the altar and lit 3 sticks of incense. The smoke rose straight for a moment, then bent toward the east window, the way it sometimes does when the afternoon air moves through the gap in the frame that Min always meant to reseal and never did. I thought. He asked once, and I did not say yes, and he left believing he was close. He would come back. Men like my son, men who have learned that patience applied to the right pressure point eventually yields results, always come back. The question was not whether Vincent would return. The question was what he would bring with him when he did. I found out 6 weeks later, when a letter arrived from a medical office I had never contacted, requesting that I schedule a cognitive assessment at my earliest convenience, and noting that the referral had been submitted by a family member acting out of concern for my well-being. I read the letter twice. I set it on the kitchen table. I went to the window and looked out at the eastern land, where the soil was still dark and deep and good, exactly as Min had described it 30 years before. Then I picked up my reading glasses, folded them carefully, and set them on top of the letter. I had 35 years of experience finding things that people had not yet realized were missing. It was time to begin. I did not schedule the appointment. I set the letter in the second drawer of the study desk, beneath a folder of utility receipts, and above the warranty documents for the refrigerator, which is where I keep things that require attention but not urgency. I have a system for everything. 35 years of managing a collection that other people depended on will do that to a person. You learn that the difference between order and chaos is not intelligence or effort. It is simply the habit of putting things where they belong and remembering why you put them there. The letter stayed in the drawer for 11 days. On the 12th day, I received a phone call from the same medical office. A receptionist, young-sounding, pleasant in the practiced way of people whose job requires pleasantness, regardless of circumstance. She asked whether I had received the referral letter. I said that I had. She asked whether I would like to schedule a time to come in. I said that I would think about it. She said the referring party had requested that the assessment be completed within the month, if possible. I thanked her and ended the call. The referring party, not my doctor, not anyone who had examined me or spoken with me about my health or had any clinical reason to believe an assessment was warranted. A referring party, which is a phrase that means someone who is not a doctor has decided, for reasons of their own, that a doctor should look at you. I went to my own physician that week. Dr. Fan has been my doctor for 18 years. She is a small, precise woman who asks questions in a particular order and listens to the answers without interrupting and has, in 18 years, never once made me feel that my time was less valuable than hers. I told her about the letter. I told her about the phone call. I told her, in the careful and complete way I tell her everything, what had been happening with Vincent and the Eastern Land. She was quiet for a moment. Then, she asked me how I was sleeping. I told her well. I told her my memory was functioning exactly as it had always functioned, which is to say thoroughly and with attention to detail that some people find excessive. She ran the standard cognitive screening, the questions about date and place and recent events, the short memory exercises, the verbal and spatial tasks. I completed them all without difficulty. She noted the results in my file and looked at me over her reading glasses with an expression that was not quite concern and not quite its opposite. Han, she said, whoever submitted that referral did not consult me. I already knew this. I had suspected it from the moment I read the letter. A referral submitted by a family member acting out of concern for my well-being, not a medical referral. A request dressed in medical language, submitted by someone who understood that the right forms, filled out with the right vocabulary, can move through administrative systems without anyone stopping to ask whether the underlying concern is genuine. I asked her to document our appointment thoroughly. She understood what I meant. She always does. On the way home, I stopped at the small market near the corner of the street where I have shopped for 20 years. The woman at the vegetable stall asked about my garden. I told her the lemongrass was coming in well. She gave me a handful of fresh ginger because she said she had too much and I should take it, and I did, and I walked the rest of the way home holding the ginger in one hand and thinking. What I was thinking about was documentation. In a library, the question is never only what exists. The question is what can be found, by whom, and under what circumstances. A document that exists in a locked box serves no purpose if the person who needs it cannot produce it at the moment it is required. A record that is accurate but incomplete can be made to look like something other than what it is by someone who controls which parts are visible and which are not. I had spent 35 years teaching people the difference between a primary source and a secondary one, between a complete record and a curated one, between information and the arrangement of information in service of a particular conclusion. Vincent had submitted a referral, which meant he had access to forms, or to someone who did, which meant he had been planning this for longer than the morning he sat at my kitchen table asking about the Eastern Land. I went to the study and opened the drawer. I took out the letter and read it again, this time looking not at what it said but at what it implied about the sequence of events that had produced it. The letterhead was from a private neurology clinic in the city's northern district. The referring party was listed only as a family member, no name, no relationship specified beyond that phrase. The letter itself was dated 2 weeks after Vincent's Saturday morning visit. 2 weeks. He had driven away from my house, with his hand on my shoulder and the small relaxation of a man who believes he is making progress, and within 2 weeks he had contacted a private neurologist and submitted a referral claiming family concern about my cognitive function. I put the letter back in the drawer. I made tea. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the Eastern Land while the water boiled, watching the way the late afternoon light moved across the soil, the same light Min had showed me the afternoon we first walked that ground. I thought about Arthur Bloom. I thought about the box I had not told anyone about, that sat in a place Vincent had never considered and would not think to look. I thought about the distance between what my son believed was already in motion and what I had already, quietly, put in place. There is a specific kind of calm that comes not from the absence of danger but from the knowledge that you have prepared for it. I had felt it once before, many years ago, when a rare manuscript in the university's collection had gone missing during a renovation, and 3 senior administrators had been certain it was lost. I had not been certain. I had simply gone back to the records, all the way back, and traced every transfer and every signature until I found the single point where the chain of custody had broken, and I had retrieved what belonged to the collection before anyone outside the building ever knew it had been missing. I was good at that. finding the thing that someone believed was no longer findable. I turned off the kettle and poured the tea and carried it to the study. I sat down at the desk and opened the notebook, the old one, to the page where Min's words were still written in my handwriting from the day we first walked this land. I turned to the next blank page and picked up a pen. Then my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. Not Vincent's, not Diana's, not anyone in my contacts. I let it ring 4 times, the way I always do with unknown numbers, giving myself time to decide. On the 5th ring, I answered. The man on the other end introduced himself as Dr. Raymond Chu. He said he was calling as a courtesy, to let me know he had received my referral and was looking forward to our consultation. His voice was smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man accustomed to having his calls returned promptly. I didn't submit a referral to you, I said. A brief pause, just long enough to tell me everything. Of course, he said. I misspoke. The referral was submitted on your behalf. Another pause. By someone who cares about you very much. I held the phone and said nothing and listened to the quality of the silence on his end. The careful professional silence of a man waiting to see whether I would simply accept what I had been told. I set the phone down on the desk without ending the call and looked at the blank page in the notebook and at the pen still in my hand. And I thought, he already has a file on me. A file he had built without ever being in the same room as me, without a single examination, without one question asked directly to the person whose mind he had apparently already assessed. The question was not what was in that file. The question was who had given him the information to fill it. I picked the phone back up. Dr. Chu was still there. I could hear the quality of his waiting patient, practiced. The silence of a man who has learned that silence applied with enough confidence can feel like authority. Dr. Chu, I said, how long have you been in practice? A small pause. He had not expected that question. 17 years. And in 17 years, have you ever completed a cognitive assessment on a patient you have never examined? The pause this time was longer, more careful. Mrs. Nguyen, I understand this may feel. I would like to know the name of the person who submitted the referral. That information is confidential. It is confidential from strangers, I said. I am the subject of the referral. I believe I have the right to know who initiated a medical process concerning my own mental health. Another pause. I heard something in the background on his end paper moving, or perhaps a chair. The sounds of a man recalibrating. The referral was submitted by your son, he said finally. Vincent Nguyen. He expressed concern about behavioral changes following your husband's death. Difficulty with complex decisions. Some memory inconsistencies. A brief hesitation. He mentioned you had recently made significant changes to your estate documents that seemed out of character. I sat very still. Out of character. That was the phrase Vincent had used. I turned it over in my mind, the way I used to turn over a damaged book spine, examining where the binding had separated and what had been forced. Thank you, I said. I will be in touch. I ended the call. I set the phone on the desk. Outside, the evening was coming in slowly the way it does in spring, the light thinning and going golden before it gives up entirely, and the eastern land was the color of old copper in the last of it. Significant changes to my estate documents. Vincent knew about the will. Not the contents. I was certain he did not know the contents, because if he had known the contents he would not have wasted time with a neurologist, he would have gone directly to a lawyer. But he knew something had been changed. He knew I had been to see Arthur Bloom. He knew enough to use it as evidence of behavioral irregularity, enough to present it to a private doctor as a symptom of something wrong. I thought about how he could have known. I thought about it methodically, the way I think about any problem of information tracing the path backward from the known point to the possible sources. Arthur Bloom would not have told him. Arthur had been Min's lawyer before he was mine, and his discretion was absolute. I had not told Lily, not yet, not in specific terms. I had not told anyone. Then I remembered the notary. Not Arthur's regular notary, who had retired the previous year. A different one, someone Arthur had arranged through his office. A young man who had come to the house on a Tuesday afternoon and witnessed my signature and been professional and unremarkable in every way I had noticed at the time. I had not thought about him since. I went to the study and found Arthur's number and called him. He answered on the 3rd ring, which for Arthur means he was already at his desk. which Arthur almost always is. I told him about Dr. Chu. I told him about the referral. I told him what Chu had said about significant changes to estate documents. I told him I needed to know who had been in his office in the weeks following the notarization and whether anyone there knew Vincent or had any connection to him. Arthur was quiet for a longer moment than I expected. "Han," he said, "I need to tell you something." The quality of those words, the particular weight of them, the way he said my name first, the way a person says a name before delivering news that requires the other person to be braced, told me before he continued that what was coming was not small. "The notary I used for your signing," he said carefully. "His name is Kevin Lamb. He works through a shared service that several firms in the district use. I've used him 4 or 5 times without issue." A pause. "His older sister is married to one of the partners at the firm that handles Vincent's real estate transactions." I did not say anything. "I had no reason to make that connection at the time," Arthur said. "There was no reason to think a notary present at a routine estate signing would have any relationship to." "Did he see the document?" "Notaries witness signatures. They are present for the signing. The standard practice is." "Arthur, did he see the contents of the document?" A pause. That was its own answer. "He would have seen enough to know it was a will. The general structure. Possibly the names on the primary sections, depending on how the pages were arranged when I set them out." His voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man who is being honest about something he wishes were otherwise. "I don't believe he saw the specific allocations, but he would have known you were there to sign a will. He would have known it was a new document, which was enough. Enough to tell Vincent that his mother had been to see her lawyer, enough to tell him that something had been signed, enough to give Vincent what he needed to go to a private neurologist and say, 'She has been making unusual decisions about her estate, and I am concerned about her capacity to make them.'" I held the phone and looked at the photograph on the altar. Minute 52, smiling, alive, certain about things he had no way of knowing would later require certainty. "I need you to do something for me," I said to Arthur. "Anything. I need you to pull the original document from wherever you have it stored and verify the date on the notarization against the date Vincent filed his referral to Dr. Chu. I can do that tonight. And Arthur, I need to know whether Vincent has engaged a lawyer yet, whether there are any filings in motion that I am not aware of, whether this has moved beyond a phone call to a neurologist." The pause before he answered was the longest of the conversation. "There may be something I should tell you about that as well," he said. And the room went very quiet, and the incense smoke from the altar drifted sideways toward the east window, and I understood that the phone call from Dr. Chu had not been the beginning of something. It had been the moment I was finally allowed to see how far something had already come. Arthur called back at 9:47 that evening. I know the exact time because I had been sitting at the study desk since our earlier call, the notebook open in front of me, writing down everything I knew in the order I knew it. Not guesses, not interpretations. Only facts, only things I could attach a date or a name or a document to. I have always believed that clarity begins with sequence. You cannot understand what is happening now without first establishing what happened, and in what order, and who was present at each point. This is not a skill I learned from librarianship. It is the other way around. I became a librarian because I already thought this way. Arthur's voice when he answered was careful in the way it gets when he has found something he did not expect to find. "The original will," he said, "is dated 14 months before Vincent's first contact with Dr. Chu's office. I already knew this. I had asked him to confirm it." "And the filings?" I said. A pause. "Vincent retained a lawyer 6 weeks ago. A firm that specializes in estate disputes and competency challenges. They haven't filed anything with the court yet, but the groundwork is in place. The filing could come any time in the next 30 to 60 days. 30 to 60 days. I wrote that in the notebook. "What do they need to move forward?" I asked. "The Chu evaluation, completed and documented. A statement from Vincent as a family member of concern. Potentially a second supporting opinion. Though with the first evaluation in hand, that becomes easier to obtain." Another pause. "Han, once they file, the process moves quickly. The court can appoint a temporary guardian while the competency question is being reviewed. During that period, your ability to manage your own financial affairs could be restricted." I understood what he was telling me. I understood it completely. Once a petition was filed, the assumption of the court shifted. Not innocent until proven guilty. Not competent until proven otherwise. The burden would fall to me to demonstrate, in formal legal proceedings, that I was capable of making my own decisions, and during the time it took to demonstrate that weeks, possibly months, Vincent could effectively control what happened to the Eastern land. "Arthur," I said, "I need two things from you. First, I need a certified copy of the original will with the notarization date clearly documented. Second, I need the names of all parties who have had any access to the document since the day it was signed. I can have the certified copy to you by tomorrow afternoon. The access records will take a day or two more." "That is fine." I paused. "And I need you to be prepared to appear in court if it comes to that." "I'll be there." No hesitation. In 17 years, Arthur has never once hesitated when it counted. I thanked him and ended the call and sat with the notebook for a while longer. The house was quiet around me in the specific way it gets after 9 in the evening, when the street sounds have settled and the only thing moving is the ceiling fan in the hallway and whatever the night air is doing outside the east window. I thought about what I needed and who could help me get it. Lily, first. Not because I wanted to involve her, I had spent months avoiding exactly that, not wanting to pull her into something that was my problem to manage. But Lily had her father's instincts and her mother's ability to watch without being seen, and there were things she had access to that I did not. She taught at the secondary school 3 streets from Vincent's office. She moved through the same district. She heard things. I called her the next morning, before 8, when I knew she would be awake but not yet at school. I told her everything. She was quiet through most of it, in the way she is quiet when she is processing rather than when she has nothing to say. When I finished, she said, "How long have you known?" "About Dr. Chu, 2 days. About Kevin Lamb, 1 day. About the lawyer, last night. And you didn't tell me sooner, because you didn't want me to worry." "I didn't tell you sooner, because I needed to know enough first to tell you something useful rather than something frightening." A pause. Then, quietly, "What do you need from me?" I told her. I needed her to find out, carefully and without alerting anyone, what Kevin Lamb's current professional situation was, whether he was still working through the same notary service, whether there was any documentation of his relationship to Vincent's firm that existed anywhere outside of what Arthur had already found. "I can do that," she said. "Lily, say nothing to Vincent. Say nothing to Diana. If either of them contacts you..." "I know, Mother." Her voice was steady. "I know." After we hung up, I drove to the university. Not my university, I retired 7 years ago, and the institution has changed in the way institutions change. New buildings and new administrators, and the comfortable accumulation of small unfamiliarities. But the library itself is the same in the ways that matter. The reading rooms. The archive section in the lower level where the rare materials are kept. The particular smell of climate-controlled air and old paper and the specific quality of silence that only exists in a place where many people have been quiet for a long time. I knew the current head librarian. We had overlapped by 4 years before my retirement. She was a methodical woman named Thon, who had learned her systems from me and improved several of them in ways I found genuinely satisfying to observe. I asked to use the archive research terminals and the legal document database the university maintains for faculty research. Thon gave me a visitor's access card without asking why, because she understood that a librarian who wants access to a research terminal has a reason, and the reason is their own business. I spent 3 hours going through the public records associated with Vincent's development firm, property transactions, permit filings, partnership documents, the routine accumulation of a business's paper trail. Most of it was unremarkable. A pattern of acquisitions in the northern and eastern districts of the city. Land purchases adjacent to established residential areas, followed by rezoning applications, followed by construction projects. Standard development practice. But in the filings from the previous 18 months, there was a cluster of transactions that caught my attention. 4 separate parcels in the Eastern District, all acquired within a 9-month period, all adjacent to one another in a configuration that made sense only if a 5th parcel completed the arrangement. I looked at the map overlay on the database screen for a long time. The 5th parcel, the one that would complete the configuration and make the entire assembled block viable for the kind of large-scale development the other 4 acquisitions pointed toward, was shaped exactly like the eastern land behind my house. Vincent had not come to my kitchen table with a casual suggestion about a developer who was interested. He had come with a transaction that was already 4/5 complete. He needed my land to close a deal that was already in motion, a deal that I now understood, looking at the scale of what was assembled around it, was worth considerably more than anything he had told me or implied or allowed me to understand. I sat back in the chair and looked at the map on the screen. A river does not announce its depth to the stones it is about to move. I had been still for a long time. Patient. Watching. Now I understood what I was watching, and the understanding was not frightening. It was clarifying, in the way that a document becomes clear when you finally have all the pages in the correct order. I printed the map and the transaction records and folded them carefully and put them in my bag beside the notebook. On my way out of the library, my phone showed a message from Lily. 4 words, Kevin Lamb. Found something. The filing came on a Thursday. Arthur called me at 10 in the morning, his voice carrying that particular flatness he uses when he is delivering news he wishes he did not have to deliver. Vincent's lawyers had submitted the competency petition to the probate court the previous afternoon. The formal hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the petition requested an interim order restricting my ability to execute any transactions involving real property until the matter was resolved. I thanked Arthur. I ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for a moment with my hand still on the phone, looking at the morning light coming through the window above the sink, the same window I have stood at for 40 years watching the garden change through every season. Then I put the kettle on, because some things continue regardless. The interim order came 2 days later, delivered by a courier who could not meet my eyes when he handed me the envelope. I signed for it and thanked him, and he left quickly, the way young people leave when they sense they have been part of something they do not fully understand. I read the document at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on. The language was precise and cold in the way legal language is always precise and cold, stripped of everything human to make room for everything procedural. It referenced Dr. Chu's evaluation, which I had still never seen but which apparently described cognitive irregularities consistent with early-stage impairment, difficulty with complex financial reasoning, and behavioral changes suggesting compromised judgment. It referenced Vincent's statement, which described a mother who had become increasingly isolated since her husband's death, who had made significant and unexplained changes to long-standing estate arrangements, and who had on multiple occasions demonstrated confusion about dates and recent events. I read that last part twice. Confusion about dates and recent events. I set the document down and removed my glasses and looked at the altar across the room, the photograph of Min at 52. The 3 incense sticks I had lit that morning, burned now to their last quarter length. The small ceramic dish that had been his mother's, that I had kept on that altar since the day we moved in because it belonged there the way certain things simply belong in certain places. I thought about what it meant to be described as confused by the person who had sat at my kitchen table and drunk my tea and told me he was in the neighborhood. 2 days after the interim order, Vincent came. He did not call first. He did not send Diana ahead, or bring a lawyer, or do anything that might suggest he understood this visit required any particular delicacy. He simply arrived at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, rang the doorbell twice in the impatient way he always rings at 2 short bursts close together, as though one ring might go unnoticed, and stood on my front step in a suit that cost more than my refrigerator, and an expression that told me everything I needed to know about how he expected this conversation to go. I let him in. I did not offer tea. He walked into the living room and stood near the altar the way he had the last time, hands in his pockets, but different now. There was something in his posture that had not been there before, a quality of settledness, of a man who has already finished calculating and found the numbers satisfactory. I wanted to talk to you about the petition, he said. I received the interim order. Good, then you understand where things stand. He looked at me, not unkindly exactly, but with a kind of careful patience that was its own form of condescension, the patience one uses with someone who needs extra time to understand what is being explained. Mother, I want you to know that none of this is meant to hurt you. The evaluation, the petition, it's because I'm worried. We're all worried. What you did with Arthur Bloom, changing the estate without telling anyone, without any discussion. I am not required to discuss my estate decisions with you. No, but when those decisions suggest that someone isn't thinking clearly, Dr. Chu has never examined me, I said. He has never been in the same room as me. He built his evaluation from information you provided to him. A pause. Something moved briefly through Vincent's expression, not guilt, not quite, but the thing adjacent to it, the small involuntary recognition that the person in front of you knows more than you expected. He recovered quickly. Dr. Chu is a respected professional. His methods, I said, will be examined by the court. Vincent looked at me for a moment. Then his expression settled back into the careful patience. Mother, I'm going to be honest with you. The court is going to appoint a guardian ad litem to review your situation. They're going to look at the estate changes, at your living situation, at the isolation. Dr. Chu's evaluation is going to carry significant weight. I don't want this to be adversarial, but the process is already in motion. He paused. It would be easier for everyone if you would agree to a proper examination. A full neurological assessment. If it comes back clean, which I hope it does, then we can put this behind us. And the Eastern land? His expression did not change. What about it? If the court restricts my ability to manage my property while this is reviewed, the land remains in a kind of suspension. Untransactable. Until the matter is resolved. That's a legal technicality. It is the specific legal technicality your lawyers requested in the filing. I looked at him steadily, along with a timeline that places the hearing after the deadline for your development consortium's financing arrangement. The room went very quiet. It was the first time I had said it directly. The first time I had let him know, without ambiguity, that I understood what the Eastern land was for. Not a sale, not a helpful suggestion from a concerned son, a parcel that completed a transaction worth. I had looked at comparable development projects in the district, somewhere between $4 and $6 million, to the consortium Vincent was part of. He stood very still for a moment. The careful patience was gone. What replaced it was something cooler. Something that looked more like the actual man beneath the practiced expressions. You should talk to a lawyer, he said. I have a lawyer. A better one. He said it quietly, without raising his voice, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. It was the voice of someone who has already assessed the opposition and found it insufficient, who has counted his resources and counted yours and determined that the outcome is not really in question. He walked to the door and then turned back once, hand on the frame, and looked at me sitting in the wooden chair with my reading glasses folded in my lap, the way I had been sitting the first day he came with his lawyer and his practiced sentence. I'm not the villain here, he said. I'm trying to protect you from yourself. He left. The door closed. The ceiling fan moved the air in slow circles. I sat for a moment in the quiet. I thought about Arthur, about Lily, about the certified copy of the will sitting in the study with its notarization date 14 months before this morning. I thought about the printed transaction records from the university database, folded in the notebook. I thought about what Lily had found, what she had sent me in 4 words that I had not yet told Vincent I knew. I thought about the box. And then I thought about Vincent's face in the moment before the careful patience returned. The fraction of a second when he understood that I knew about the development deal, and something that had been very certain became slightly less so. He had walked out of this room believing he was ahead. He was not as far ahead as he thought, but the hearing was 6 weeks away, and Dr. Chu's file existed, and the interim order was real and filed, and already working exactly as Vincent's lawyers had intended it to work, and I was 69 years old sitting alone in a house where the incense had burned down to nothing, and the smoke had long since gone. For the first time since Arthur's call on Thursday morning, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what was in front of me. It was considerable. I put my glasses on and opened the notebook and picked up the pen. Then I wrote, at the top of a new page, the name Lily had sent me. The name that connected Dr. Raymond Chu, not just to Kevin Lamb, not just to Vincent's real estate firm, but to something I had not anticipated, something that changed the shape of everything I thought I understood about how far this had already gone. Lily came on a Wednesday evening, after school, still carrying her bag. She did not call ahead. She knocked twice in the soft way she has always knocked, the way that is more announcement than request, and when I opened the door, she came in and set her bag on the chair by the entrance and turned to look at me with an expression I had not seen on her face since the morning I called to tell her that her father was gone. "Sit down," she said. I sat. She took the chair across from me, the one Vincent had used, and she placed her phone on the table between us, screen up, and she looked at me for a moment the way a person looks at someone they love before they say something that will change the shape of the room permanently. "Kevin Lamb," she said. "His sister is married to a partner at Vincent's firm." "You know that part." "I know that part. What I found is different." She touched her phone, then stopped, then looked at me again. "Last year, in September. Do you remember when you had your regular checkup with Dr. Fan? The full annual examination?" I remembered. September, the 12th. I remembered because Min had been gone for just over a year by then, and I had marked it in the notebook, the first annual examination I had attended without him knowing I was going. I remember. The clinic uses a patient records management system. Digital files, accessible to the administrative staff for billing and scheduling. Lily paused. Kevin Lamb's brother-in-law, the partner at Vincent's firm, his wife manages billing for 3 private medical clinics in the district. One of them is the same clinic where Dr. Fan has her practice. I sat with that sentence. I arranged its parts in the order they needed to be arranged. The annual examination, my cognitive screening results, all normal, documented in Dr. Fan's careful handwriting, the billing and administrative system. A woman whose husband worked with my son. Access. She accessed my medical file, I said. Lily's expression gave me my answer before she spoke. The system logs who views a patient record. Dr. Fan's administrator noticed in irregular access last October someone had logged in under a billing code to view your records and spent 11 minutes in the file. She flagged it internally, but at the time there was no obvious reason to escalate it. Lily touched her phone. The administrator contacted Dr. Fan last week, after Dr. Fan apparently mentioned to her that something unusual was happening with your family situation. When Dr. Fan looked at the access log and saw the billing account that had opened your file, she recognized the name. She recognized the firm. I looked at my hands on the table. I looked at them for a long time, at the knuckles and the veins and the thin gold band I still wear on my left hand because I have never had any reason to take it off. I thought about what 11 minutes inside a medical file looks like. What a person can learn in 11 minutes when they know what they are looking for and they are looking for a way to build a case. My visit history, my medications, which are few and unremarkable, the cognitive screening results from September, all normal, all documented cleanly, and the notes from my appointment 2 weeks after the notary visit, the one where I had told Dr. Fan about the letter from Dr. Chu and she had run the follow-up screening and documented everything I had asked her to document. They had seen that file before Dr. Fan and I put our additional documentation in place. They had seen it when it contained the routine record of a 69-year-old woman in good health, with no flags, no concerns, no notes about family pressure or unusual legal activity. They had seen it clean before I knew they were looking. And then Dr. Chu had written his evaluation, the one I had never seen, the one that described cognitive irregularities and difficulty with financial reasoning, and I understood now where he had found the clinical language to wrap around Vincent's account of my behavior, a medical file accessed without my knowledge. Normal results reframed through a different lens, pressed into service as background for a conclusion that had already been decided before any evaluation was written. "Lily," I said, and my voice came out steady, which surprised me, because what I felt in that moment was not steady at all. What I felt was the specific kind of grief that comes not from losing something but from understanding how long something has been lost without your knowledge. "How long has Vincent been planning this?" She picked up her phone. She opened something, turned it toward me. It was a screenshot of an email thread. I could see Vincent's name in the header. The recipient was the managing partner at the law firm handling his development consortium. The date at the top of the thread was 18 months ago. 8 months before Vincent had come to my kitchen on a Saturday morning to ask about the Eastern land. I took the phone from her and read. The email was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph described the development project, the assembled parcels, the financing timeline. The second paragraph described the 5th parcel, my Eastern land, and the complications of the fact that it was currently held by an elderly widow with no immediate plans for the property and a recently amended estate plan that directed the land away from the primary heir. The third paragraph used a phrase I read twice, then a third time. We are exploring options for establishing legal authority to act on her behalf in property matters. Our timeline requires resolution within the fiscal year. Establishing legal authority to act on her behalf. Not buying the land. Not negotiating. Not asking. Establishing authority. The competency petition. The neurologist with the 11-minute window into my file. The notary whose family connection made sure the right person knew I had been to see my lawyer. All of it not reactive, not a response to concern about my well-being, not even primarily about the money. A plan, written down in an email 18 months ago, to obtain legal control over my ability to manage my own property so that a transaction I had never agreed to could proceed on someone else's timeline. I set the phone down on the table. The room was very quiet. Outside, the evening was settling in, and the incense from the morning had long since burned away, and the altar held only the photograph and the silence and the small ceramic dish that had been Minja's mother's and would not be sold for anyone's development timeline. I thought about the last time Vincent had stood in this room, the suit, the settled posture of a man who has counted his resources and found them sufficient, his hand on the door frame. I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to protect you from yourself. An 18-month-old email sat on the table between me and my daughter, and I thought about the 30 years Min and I had spent in this house, and the 35 years I had spent building something at the university that outlasted my tenure there, and the notebook in the study drawer with the water pressure measurements from the day we first walked through these rooms, and I understood that what I felt in this moment was not something I had a clean word for in any language. It was the feeling of having given something your whole life, and watching someone decide it was available for use. It was the feeling of being made into a problem to be managed in a document you were never meant to see. Lily reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She did not say anything. She is her father's daughter, which means she knows when the most useful thing is to simply be present. I looked at our hands on the table. I looked at the photograph on the altar. The email, I said finally. How did you get it? Lily was quiet for a moment. The administrator at Dr. Fan's clinic. When she realized what the unauthorized file access might be connected to, she reached out to a contact she had, someone who had worked briefly at the law firm before leaving. A pause. She was not the only person there who was uncomfortable with how certain things were being handled. I nodded slowly. I sat with everything on the table, the phone, the email, the 18 months of careful construction, the specific cold intelligence of a plan that had looked like concern and felt like family and had been, from the very beginning, neither. I picked up my reading glasses from where they sat beside me and put them on, and I looked at the email again, at the date, at the words, at all of it laid out in the clean sequential logic of a document that said everything its author had never intended me to read. Then I closed my hand around Lily's and held on. And I thought, they built their case on a file they were never supposed to see. I had built mine on 35 years of knowing where things are kept and what it takes to find them. The hearing was 4 weeks away. It was time to open the box. The box had been at the university for 4 years. Not hidden, precisely. Placed. There is a difference that matters enormously to anyone who has spent a career thinking about the relationship between objects and the systems designed to hold them. Hidden implies concealment, implies that someone might be looking and must be prevented from finding. Placed implies intention, the deliberate act of putting something where it belongs, in the care of people who understand how to keep things safe and why that keeping matters. I had a long-term storage arrangement with the university archive. Many retired faculty do. 35 years of professional materials research files, correspondence, acquisition records, the accumulated documentation of a career requires somewhere to live after the person who created them is no longer coming in every day to tend them. The archive provides climate-controlled storage, access by appointment, and the kind of institutional continuity that private homes cannot reliably offer. I had used mine 3 times since retiring, once to retrieve a reference file for a former colleague, once to add materials from the year after my retirement, once, 4 years ago, to place a locked metal box in the deepest section of my allocated storage space. Behind 30 years of professional files that no one but me had any reason to look through, I went on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks before the hearing. Thon gave me my visitor's card at the entrance without comment, the way she always does. I went to the archive level alone. The reading room attendant, a young man who had been there for 3 years and knew my name and my face and my habit of working quietly without asking for assistance, unlocked my storage bay and left me to it. I found the box exactly where I had placed it, beneath a folder of acquisition correspondence from 2015, behind a box of cataloging records from the renovation year, in the back left corner where the light from the overhead panel fell at an angle that left the corner in partial shadow. I lifted it out and set it on the reading table and took the key from the inner pocket of my bag, where it had been since the day I put it there 4 years ago and where it had remained, on my person, every day since. The lock opened without difficulty. I lifted the lid. The will was on top, in a clear archival sleeve of the kind I had used for decades to protect documents from humidity and handling. Beneath it, the certified copy Arthur had provided when I first had the document prepared, with the notarization date visible through the sleeve. Beneath that, a sealed envelope containing the written record of my conversation with Arthur on the day of the signing his notes, my instructions, the questions I had asked and the answers he had given, all written in his careful hand and signed by both of us at the bottom of the last page. And beneath that, something I had placed there more recently. 3 weeks ago, after Dr. Fan's administrator had made contact and the shape of things had become clear enough to act on, a thumb drive, small, gray, unremarkable, containing copies of the access log from Dr. Fan's clinic records system, showing the date and duration and billing account identifier of the unauthorized viewing of my medical file. Copies of the transaction records I had printed at the university database, showing the 4 assembled parcels and the gap that my eastern land would fill. A scanned copy of the email Lily had obtained, dated 18 months ago, with its cold and careful language about establishing legal authority and fiscal year timelines. And one additional item I had not yet told Arthur about. I lifted the thumb drive and held it for a moment, then set it on the table beside the will and looked at the 2 objects together. A document signed 14 months before the petition was filed, witnessed and notarized and stored in an institution whose record-keeping had outlasted 3 changes in university administration and would outlast several more, and a collection of digital files that told the complete story of how a plan had been constructed, maintained, and set in motion by people who had never expected the person at the center of it to be paying the kind of attention I had been paying. I am a librarian. I have always understood that the most powerful thing in any room is not the person who speaks the loudest. It is the person who has already read everything. I repacked the box carefully, returned it to its place, and left the archive with the will in its sleeve, and the thumb drive in my bag, and the sealed envelope tucked against my notebook. That afternoon I met with Arthur. He had arranged for us to meet at his office rather than my home, which I appreciated. The home is where Vincent came. The home is where the incense burns and the photograph watches, and the weight of everything I had built with Min exists in every surface and every corner. Arthur's office is neutral, professional, a place where documents are the primary language and emotion is held at a respectful distance while the work gets done. I laid everything on his desk in the order in which it should be presented. The will first, the notarization date, the access log, the transaction records, the email, and last, the additional item from the thumb drive, which I had printed that morning at the library terminal before coming to Arthur's office, because I wanted him to see it on paper, the way I had first seen it, where its full weight could be felt without the mediation of a screen. Arthur read it carefully. He is not a man who skims. He read every word, went back to 2 sections, read them again, and then set the document down, and looked at me over his reading glasses, with an expression I had not seen on his face before, something between professional satisfaction and genuine indignation, which on Arthur's carefully composed face was the equivalent of another person standing up and raising their voice. "Where did you get this?" he said. "The same way I find anything," I said. "I looked in the right place." He nodded slowly. He picked up his pen. "I'm going to need to make several calls this afternoon. The clinic administrator needs to provide a formal statement. The access log needs to be authenticated by the record system itself, not just a screenshot." He was already writing, And this he touched the printed page. This needs to go to the court's attention before the hearing, not during it. Pre-filing disclosure. Give the other side the opportunity to withdraw, and if they don't withdraw, give the judge time to arrive at the hearing already understanding what she will be looking at. Will they withdraw? Arthur looked at me steadily. If they have any sense, yes. If pride overrides sense, he paused. Then we will have a very complete morning in court. I appreciated that he said we. On the way home, I stopped at the market and bought vegetables and the particular kind of ginger the woman at the stall always selects for me because she says my taste is consistent and consistency is worth respecting. I walked home the long way, through the streets I have walked for 40 years, past the school where Lily had once been a student and was now a teacher, past the repair shop, where the man who fixed our ceiling fan still worked, though he was considerably older than he had been the first time Min had brought the fan in wrapped in newspaper. The city moved around me the way it always has, indifferent to individual stories, absorbed in its own accumulation of small and large events, entirely unconcerned with what was going to happen in a probate courtroom in 14 days. At home I lit 3 sticks of incense and stood at the altar. I did not speak out loud. There are things that do not need to be said aloud to be fully communicated, and Min had always understood me better in my silences than in my words. What I felt standing there was not triumph. It was too early for that, and I am too careful a person to confuse preparation with outcome. What I felt was something quieter, the particular stillness of a person who has done what needed to be done, who has placed every piece where it belongs, who has only now to wait for the moment when the arrangement becomes visible to everyone in the room. I thought about Vincent's face at the door, his hand on the frame, the suit, the settled posture. He had walked out of this house believing the advantage was his. In 14 days, he would walk into a courtroom carrying that belief, and I would already be there, waiting, with everything placed exactly where it needed to be. The incense smoke rose straight and then curved gently east, the way it does when the evening air begins to move, and I watched it go, and I thought, the hearing is not the end of this story, but it is where the story becomes clear to everyone who needs to understand it. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. I do not know what I had expected. Something grander, perhaps, commensurate with what was being decided inside it. But probate court is not a place built for drama. It is a place built for paperwork, for the orderly resolution of disputes about things that belong to people who are no longer present to speak for themselves. The wood paneling was the color of old tea. The fluorescent lights were the kind that flatten everything beneath them, that make every face look like it has been examined rather than lived in. The windows along the east wall were narrow, admitting a strip of morning light that fell across the floor at an angle too thin to do much good. I arrived 40 minutes early. Arthur was already there, at the table on the left side of the room, arranging his folders in the order we had agreed upon. He looked up when I came in, nodded once, the nod of a man who has done his preparation and is ready, and returned to his papers. I sat beside him and placed my bag on the floor and folded my reading glasses on the table in front of me and looked at the room. The judge's bench was elevated slightly. The witness area to the right. The gallery behind us, already with a few people seated who had business in other matters and were waiting. Lily sat 3 rows back, on the left. I had told her she did not need to come. She had come anyway, which is very much the kind of person she is. Vincent and Diana arrived 17 minutes before the scheduled time. Vincent's lawyer was with them, a tall man whose suits I had noticed at the earlier procedural hearing, expensive in the deliberate way that is meant to signal competence through fabric. They sat at the table across the aisle, and Vincent arranged himself in his chair with the settled quality I had become familiar with over the past months, the posture of someone who believes the room is already arranged in his favor. He glanced at me once. I met his eyes. He looked away first. Judge Carol Whitfield entered at 9 o'clock with the exact punctuality of someone who considers other people's time a resource worth respecting. She was a woman in her late 50s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a manner that suggested she had seen every variation of family dispute that property and grief could produce and had formed clear opinions about most of them. She settled into her bench, reviewed the file in front of her for a moment, and looked up. This is the matter of the competency petition filed by Vincent Nguyen regarding his mother, Hanh Nguyen. She looked at Vincent's lawyer. "Counselor, you filed this petition. You may proceed." The lawyer stood. He was smooth and prepared. He described the situation in the language that had been agreed upon in the petition: a grieving widow, increasingly isolated, making significant and uncharacteristic changes to long-standing estate arrangements, a family concerned about her capacity to protect her own interests. He referenced Dr. Chu's evaluation. He referenced Vincent's statement. He spoke about the duty of family to intervene when a vulnerable elder could no longer be trusted to act in her own best interest. He used that phrase, vulnerable elder. I kept my hands flat on the table and my expression composed, and I listened to every word. When he finished, Judge Whitfield turned to Arthur. Arthur stood. He is not a man who performs. He does not raise his voice or use the elevated register that some lawyers use to signal importance. He simply speaks with the precision of someone who has ordered his materials correctly and trusts that the materials themselves will do the necessary work. Your Honor, he said, the petitioner's central claim rests on a psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Raymond Chu. Before addressing the substance of that evaluation, I would like to establish the circumstances under which it was produced. He presented the clinic access log first, authentication from the records management system, timestamp and account identifier, 11 minutes inside my medical file, by a billing account linked to the law firm handling Vincent's development consortium. He set the certified copy on the clerk's desk and spoke about it without embellishment, just sequence, just facts placed in their correct order. I watched Vincent's lawyer's face. I watched it the way I used to watch the faces of students who realized midway through a research presentation that they had cited a source that did not say what they had claimed it said. The particular quality of stillness that is not calm but is the suppression of something that very much wants to move. Arthur presented Dr. Fan's documentation next. 18 years of consistent care. The cognitive screening results from September, all normal, all thoroughly recorded. The follow-up appointment, my own request. Every result confirmed and dated and signed. He submitted the letter from Dr. Fan's administrator, describing the unauthorized file access and its discovery. Then he paused, in the way that good lawyers pause not for drama, but to allow what has already been said to settle before adding weight to it. Dr. Chu's evaluation, Arthur said, describes cognitive irregularities and difficulty with financial reasoning in a patient he has never examined. He has never been in the same room as Mrs. Nguyen. He has never administered a single test, asked her a single question, or made a single direct observation. His evaluation was constructed from information provided by the petitioner, information that includes details extracted from a medical file, accessed without the patient's knowledge or consent, by a party with a documented financial relationship to the petitioner's business interests. The judge had been writing. She stopped writing and looked up. Arthur set the transaction records on the clerk's desk, 4 assembled parcels in the Eastern District, the gap that the Eastern land would fill, the financing timeline, and the projected development value. Then the email, dated 18 months ago, in Vincent's name, to the managing partner of his consortium. We are exploring options for establishing legal authority to act on her behalf in property matters. Our timeline requires resolution within the fiscal year. The judge read it. She read it fully, the way she had read everything carefully, completely, without the performance of reading. When she finished, she set it down and looked at Vincent's table with an expression I had not seen her use before, a quality of regard that had become considerably less neutral. Vincent's lawyer stood. Your Honor, that document. Sit down, counselor, she said it quietly. He sat. She turned to me. Mrs. Nguyen, she said. Would you like to speak? I stood. I put my reading glasses on, because I wanted to see the room clearly, every face, the light from the east windows, all of it. Your Honor, I said, my son told this court that I do not remember signing my will, that I am confused about dates and recent events, that my decisions are not the decisions of a woman thinking clearly. I paused. The will was signed 14 months before this petition was filed. I remember the day clearly. It was a Tuesday. Arthur served coffee. I read every page before I signed it because I wanted to understand exactly what I was putting my name to. I have always believed that a signature is a serious thing. I looked at Vincent then. Not with anger. Not with the heat of someone who has been waiting for this moment to perform a victory. I looked at him the way I have always looked at things that required clear and accurate assessment steadily, completely, without flinching. My son said in this room, in front of a lawyer and a judge, that I am not competent to make decisions about my own property. I let the sentence stand for a moment. He said this while submitting an evaluation from a doctor who has never met me, built from a medical file accessed without my knowledge, in service of a business transaction planned 18 months before I was told any of this was happening. Another pause. He said it the way a person says something they have rehearsed, calmly, confidently. As though the question of my mind was already settled, and we were simply here to confirm the paperwork. I reached into my bag and set the original will on Arthur's table, in its archival sleeve, the notarization date facing outward. I remember signing this, I said. I remember the date, I remember the weather, I remember what Arthur was wearing, and what the garden looked like when I drove home afterward. I looked at the judge. That is not confusion. That is the memory of a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and why. I sat down. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Whitfield looked at the will. She looked at the email. She looked at Vincent's table, where the lawyer was very still, and Diana was examining the surface of the table, and Vincent was looking somewhere slightly to the left of everything, the way a person looks when they are trying to locate the version of events that is still salvageable. There was no salvageable version. And I sat in my chair with my reading glasses on and my hands flat on the table, and I thought about the morning Vincent had stood in my living room and said she doesn't even remember signing that will, and I thought about how certain he had sounded, and how completely and specifically wrong a certain person can be. Judge Whitfield set down the email and looked at Vincent's table for a long moment before she spoke. "Counselor," she said, "I'd like to hear from your client about this document." Vincent's lawyer stood. He had the careful composure of a man who had spent the recess between the morning's presentations, constructing a position from materials that were no longer adequate for the purpose. "Your Honor, the document speaks to a business matter entirely separate from the question of Mrs. Nguyen's competency. My client's professional interests and his genuine concern for his mother are not mutually exclusive. The document," the judge said, "is dated 18 months ago. In it, your client describes plans to obtain legal authority over his mother's property decisions in order to meet a fiscal year deadline for a development transaction. The petition before this court was filed 14 months later." She paused. "That is not a coincidence I'm prepared to overlook. I would like to hear from Mr. Vincent Nguyen directly." The lawyer turned to Vincent. Something passed between them, a look, brief, the compressed communication of two people who have just discovered their plan has fewer exits than they believed. Vincent stood. He had dressed carefully for this morning. The suit was his best one, charcoal, well-fitted, the kind of suit that carries authority in rooms where authority is performed through appearance. He had worn it, I understood now, because he had expected this morning to be the formality at the end of a process he had already controlled, a hearing where the outcome was prearranged, where the documentation supported the conclusion, where the elderly woman at the other table would have no answer sufficient to the weight of a doctor's evaluation and a son's concern. He stood in that suit, and he looked at the judge, and he said, "I was trying to protect my mother." Judge Whitfield waited. "She was alone," he continued. "After my father died, she became more isolated. She was making decisions without talking to anyone in the family. The estate changes. The property she never told me. I found out through," he stopped. "Through whom?" the judge said. A pause that lasted too long. "Through a professional contact," Vincent said. "Someone who had become aware that she had visited an estate lawyer. A professional contact who had access to information about your mother's private legal appointments." The judge's voice had not changed in volume or speed. It had changed in something harder to name, a quality of precision that made every word feel load-bearing. "And this contact, was this the same billing account that accessed your mother's medical file?" Vincent's lawyer put a hand on his client's arm. "Your Honor, my client. Counselor, your client is answering my question." The hand withdrew. Vincent looked at the table. He looked at the email, which was still sitting on the clerk's desk where Arthur had placed it, its date visible from across the room. He looked at it the way a person looks at a document they wrote in the certainty that it would never be read by the wrong person, and he said nothing for a moment that stretched until it contained everything he was not saying. "We had a business timeline," he said finally. "The land was critical to the project. I was trying to find a way to move forward that didn't require. He stopped again. That didn't require your mother's consent, the judge said. It was not a question. Diana, who had been sitting very still at the table throughout the morning with the careful blankness of someone maintaining a position through will rather than ease, shifted in her chair. It was a small movement, just a degree or two, the almost imperceptible physical act of creating distance from the person beside you while remaining in the same seat. I noticed it. I noticed small things. It is, as I have said, the habit of a lifetime. Arthur rose. Your Honor, in light of what has been established this morning, we respectfully request that the court dismiss the petition with prejudice and that it consider sanctions appropriate to the filing of a fraudulent medical evaluation in a competency proceeding. Vincent's lawyer stood immediately. Your Honor, the evaluation was submitted in good faith? In good faith. Arthur's voice remained level. A psychological evaluation of a woman the evaluating physician has never met, containing clinical descriptions drawn from a medical file accessed without the patient's consent, submitted to support a petition whose underlying purpose was to facilitate a business transaction. He set one additional document on the clerk's desk. This is a statement from Dr. Raymond Chu's former colleague at the clinic where he practiced for 9 years before establishing his private consultancy. It describes 3 prior instances in which Dr. Chu produced evaluations for parties he had never examined, in each case in connection with estate or property disputes where one party had a financial interest in the outcome. The courtroom was very quiet. I looked at Vincent. He was looking at the document Arthur had just placed on the clerk's desk with the expression of a man who has opened a door expecting one room and found that the room extends much further than he had accounted for. I had found that document the same way I find everything. I had gone back to the records, all the way back, and traced the pattern until the shape of it became visible. Dr. Chu had done this before, not often, carefully enough that no single instance had generated formal complaint. But the pattern was there for anyone who knew how to look. And I had spent 35 years teaching people exactly that skill. Judge Whitfield reviewed the statement. She reviewed it completely, in the same thorough way she had reviewed every other document this morning, and when she finished, she set her pen down. The petition is dismissed, she said. With prejudice. She looked at Vincent's table. Furthermore, this court finds that the psychological evaluation submitted in support of this petition was prepared without direct examination of the subject, and that its submission constitutes a material misrepresentation to this court. I am referring the matter of Dr. Chu's evaluation practices to the State Medical Board for review. She paused. Regarding the unauthorized access to Mrs. Nguyen's medical records, I am directing the clerk to forward the relevant documentation to the appropriate regulatory authority. She looked at Vincent directly then, with the specific quality of regard that I imagine she had developed over many years of watching people in this courtroom discover the gap between what they had planned and what was actually permitted. Mr. Nguyen, she said, your mother is competent. She has always been competent. She made decisions about her own estate that you did not prefer, and rather than accepting that these were her decisions to make, you constructed a legal process designed to remove her ability to make them. A pause. This court does not look favorably on that. I would suggest you reflect carefully on that distinction. She closed the file. Vincent sat down. Not the deliberate settling of a man arranging himself with authority, but the way a person sits when the structure they have been standing on has given way beneath them, and sitting is what remains. Diana did not look at him. She was looking at the table, at her own hands, at something in the middle distance that had nothing to do with the room. The small distance she had created between them and her chair had not closed. Arthur gathered his folders. Around us, the courtroom began its ordinary sounds again, the clerk moving papers, people in the gallery shifting, the fluorescent lights doing what fluorescent lights always do, which is illuminate everything with perfect indifference to what is being revealed beneath them. Lily appeared at the gate of the gallery. I did not turn to look at her, but I felt her there the way I always feel her presence, steady, warm, her father's quality of being entirely present in a room without demanding that the room rearrange itself around him. I folded my reading glasses and placed them in my bag. I thought about the morning in my living room when Vincent had stood near the altar, near his father's photograph, and said the words he had practiced. She doesn't even remember signing that will. The confidence in it. the certainty of a man who had decided what was true and expected the room to confirm it. He had said it in front of a lawyer. He had repeated a version of it in a court filing. He had given it to a doctor to translate into clinical language. He had built an entire structure on the foundation of that sentence. The foundation had not held. Not because I had shouted. Not because I had confronted him in the way that satisfies an audience but changes nothing in the record. Because I had done what I have always done, gone back to the source, verified the document, traced the chain of custody from the original to the present, and placed everything where it could be found by the person who needed to find it. The gavel did not come down on anything dramatic. Judge Whitfield simply closed the file and moved to the next matter on her docket. That was enough. That was, in fact, exactly enough. The drive home from the courthouse took 23 minutes. I know because I counted, not deliberately, but in the way the mind counts things when it has been running at full capacity for a long time and needs something simple and sequential to rest against. Lily drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the window, the same streets I had walked for 40 years, the same light falling at the same angles it always falls in the late morning, everything exactly as it had been before we went in, and entirely unchanged by what had happened inside. That is the thing about justice that no one tells you when you are young. It does not announce itself from the outside. The streets do not know. The market woman with the ginger does not know. The man at the repair shop, the students at the school where Lily teaches, the city accumulating its ordinary Tuesday around itself. None of it registers the moment when a document was placed on a clerk's desk and a judge read it fully and said the words that needed to be said. The world continues. You carry the change inside you, private, settled, complete. Lily did not speak much on the drive. She had her father's understanding of when silence is the correct response to a significant thing. When we turned onto the street that leads to the house, she reached over and briefly touched my hand on the armrest, and I let her, and that was sufficient. At home, I changed out of the clothes I had worn to court, the gray dye, the careful one, which I had chosen for the same reason. I had chosen it the day Vincent came with his lawyer, because it makes me feel composed, and put on the simpler house clothes I wear when I am not performing anything for anyone. Then I went to the kitchen and made tea, real tea, the kind that requires attention and time, not the quick kind, because the day deserved a proper cup and I was no longer in a hurry. While the tea steeped, I went to the altar. Min at 52, the photograph I have looked at every morning for 3 years, the smile from the boat on Ha Long Bay when he refused the life jacket because it made him look like an orange. I lit 3 sticks of incense. I watched the smoke begin its slow rise, straight first, then finding the air currents in the room, bending gently toward the east window the way it so often does. I did not say anything out loud. I did not need to. There are conversations that have been ongoing for 40 years and require no new words to continue. Arthur called in the afternoon. His voice carried the particular quality of restrained satisfaction that is his version of relief. The court's referral to the medical board had been formally submitted. The regulatory authority had received the documentation regarding the clinic file access. The petition was dismissed with prejudice, which means it cannot be refiled. These things were now part of the record, fixed, dated, impossible to revise. The Development Consortium, Arthur said, will need to find another solution for their eastern parcel. With the timeline they were operating on, and the financing arrangement already in place, the delay is likely fatal to the project as structured. I had not asked about the consortium, but I received this information the way I receive information that clarifies rather than surprises, as the natural conclusion of a chain of events whose logic was visible from the beginning, once you knew where to look. And Vincent? I said. A pause. He is in a difficult position professionally. The referral to the state bar is not guaranteed to result in formal action against his lawyers, but the associated publicity, a dismissed petition, fraudulent medical documentation, unauthorized record access, these things have a way of becoming known in the circles where such things matter. Another pause. Diana filed for legal separation 2 days ago. I thought about the small movement in Diana's chair, the almost imperceptible degree of distance. I see, I said. Han. Arthur's voice shifted into something more personal, less procedural. You handled this with more patience and precision than most people would have managed. I want you to know that. I had good materials to work with, I said. and good help. After we hung up, I sat in the study for a while, in the chair where I had read the letter from Dr. Chu's office on a morning that felt very long ago now, though it was not quite 4 months. 4 months from a letter in the second drawer, to a dismissed petition, and a referral to the medical board. In library terms, that is a very efficient resolution for a complex research problem. I opened the notebook. The old one, from the year we bought the house, with the water pressure measurements and the window observations and Min's words about the eastern land written in my handwriting from an afternoon 30 years ago. I turned to the pages I had added over the past months, the sequence of events, the names, the dates, the chain of custody from the original document to the courtroom. I read it through once, from beginning to end, the way I always read a completed catalog to verify that everything is in its correct place, that nothing is missing, that the record is whole. It was whole. I turned to the last entry I had made, and I wrote the date of the hearing, and the outcome, and Arthur's name, and Lily's. Then I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer where it has always lived, beneath the utility receipts, above the refrigerator warranty. That evening, Lily came for dinner. She brought vegetables from the market, the good ones, and she cooked in my kitchen the way she has cooked in it, since she was a teenager learning from her father, who had learned from his mother, who had learned from hers. I sat at the table and watched her move through the kitchen with the comfortable efficiency of someone who knows where everything is kept, and I thought about what it means to pass things on correctly. Not the land, not the house, not the money, though all of those matter in their practical ways. The other things, the notebook, the habit of sequence, the understanding that a document is only as good as the system that keeps it safe and the person who knows where to find it, the knowledge that patience is not weakness but a different kind of force, slower and less visible than the kind that announces itself in a lawyer's office or a courtroom, but more durable, more complete. These are the things I want Lily to have. These are what I intend to leave. After dinner, we sat on the porch in the early evening, the city settling into its night sounds around us, the air carrying the particular quality of October cooler than the months before, with something in it that feels like a deliberate shift, like the city drawing a breath and deciding to begin a new arrangement. We did not talk about Vincent. We talked about Lily's students, about a novel she was teaching that she thought one of them had genuinely understood in a way that surprised her, about the lemongrass along the south wall that had come in better than expected this year. We talked about Min, the way we can talk about him now, not around the loss but through it, the way you navigate a landscape you have learned well enough to move through without being stopped by it. When she left, I stood at the door and watched her car until it turned at the corner. Then I went back inside and went to the altar one more time. The incense I had lit that morning was long finished. The smoke had traveled wherever smoke travels, when it has done what it came to do. I did not light new ones. I simply stood and looked at the photograph, and at the ceramic dish, and at the quality of lamplight falling across the altar table, the ordinary, unremarkable, entirely sufficient light of a house that has held everything I value for 40 years, and will hold it still. I thought about Vincent's voice in my living room on that first morning. Calm and practiced and certain. She doesn't even remember signing that will. The confidence in it, the assumption embedded in every word that what he believed was already the truth, that the room would simply confirm it, that the document, if it existed, if she had signed it, if she remembered, it would yield to the weight of his certainty. A document does not yield to certainty. A document is indifferent to what anyone wishes it to say. It says what it says. It is dated when it is dated. It exists where it is placed, waiting for the moment when the right person knows where to look. I went to bed at 9:30, which is when I always go to bed, and I slept the way I sleep when the work is finished and the catalog is complete and everything is in its correct place. Still, water runs deepest, and the river that moves without noise carries the heaviest stone, and it carries it all the way, without stopping, to exactly where it needs to go. If anyone has ever looked at you and decided you were finished, that age had made you soft, that grief had made you simple, that silence meant you had nothing left to say, this story is for you. The ones who underestimate a quiet person have never understood that still water runs deepest. You are not invisible. You are simply waiting for the right moment. If Han's story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. New stories go up every day, and every one of them belongs to someone who needed to hear it. In the comments, tell us, Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, and what did you do about it?